She walked out of the newborn ward, cradling a baby that wasn't hers. No one noticed, no alarms, just quiet footsteps and a soft lullaby hummed by a stranger. But then he barked. Sunny, a golden retriever therapy dog, broke the silence, and everything changed. Behind those sterile white halls of St. Clair Hospital lies a story of loss reunion and a truth too painful to bury. A stolen baby, a shattered past, a brother and sister torn apart by time, and a dog who refused to look away. What happened next will restore your faith in fate. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments. Let's see how far Sunny's story can travel. Maple Glen was one of those towns that felt caught in time. Not by any lack of progress, but by a kind of reverence for stillness where the seasons were respected, where names carried weight, and where every crack in the sidewalk seemed to whisper an old story. This early spring morning the fog lingered low, ghosting past the iron gate of St. Clair Hospital. Dew clung to the dogwood trees out front, their buds still shy from the recent frost. The wind was light-chilled, just enough to make breath visible, and the sky above wore that soft gray hue of hospitals and prayers. Inside St. Clair, the polished floors and antiseptic air buzzed with the usual rhythm of beeping monitors and soft-soled footsteps. The pediatric and geriatric wings shared a corridor, a symbolic crossroad of beginnings and farewells. And padding down this hallway as familiar as any nurse was Sunny. Sunny was a 6-year-old male golden retriever with honey-colored fur and intelligent amber eyes. His muzzle had just started to pale with age, and his pace was steady, gentle, deliberate. He wore a navy blue vest with embroidered white letters that read, "Therapy Dog, Emotional Support Unit." Calmness seemed to radiate from him like a hearth. Children reached for him with sticky fingers. Elderly patients murmured his name with soft smiles, and even the most sleep-deprived nurses paused to scratch behind his ears. But what made Sunny special wasn't just his training or demeanor. It was the quiet awareness he carried, as if he understood things before they were spoken. Walking beside him was Dr. Lena Morris, his handler and the hospital's lead trauma psychologist. Lena was in her late 30s, a woman of gentle stature, with shoulder-length chestnut-brown hair, often pulled into a loose bun. Her hazel eyes were sharp but never cold, and light freckles kissed her pale skin. She wore a charcoal gray blouse under a navy cardigan, practical slacks, and the kind of shoes that knew long days. Patients trusted her not just for her insight, but for her stillness, something hard-earned. Few knew that 4 years earlier she'd lost a daughter to a rare genetic disorder. Since then, she'd poured herself into her work and into Sunny the dog she'd adopted not long after. "Easy boy," Lena said, glancing down as they passed room 212, where Mr. Halberd, a retired school principal, was humming softly to himself. Sunny gave a polite tail wag, but didn't pause. He knew the schedule. They made their way toward the neonatal wing. It was the time of day when Lena visited mothers dealing with postpartum depression or anxiety, when Sunny would curl up at their feet or nuzzle a hand until tears slowed. But today, something fractured the rhythm. It began with a low rumble from Sunny's throat. They were still 10 feet from the security-coded door that led into the neonatal area, when he suddenly froze, his ears' sharp nostrils flaring. His stance changed, shoulders, squared legs braced. Then the growl deepened into a bark. Not the soft, encouraging one. Lena knew not his look-at-me bark for children. This was different, protective, urgent, commanding. "Sonny." Lena blinked, pulling gently on his lead, but he wouldn't budge. At that moment, the door ahead clicked open with a pneumatic hiss. A woman stepped through. She was tall and narrow, her long dark coat swaying with the movement of her stride. Her face was turned slightly away beneath the low brim of a beige wool hat, but in her arms she cradled a bundled infant wrapped in a pastel hospital blanket. Sonny erupted. His bark echoed down the corridor, sharp and alarming. Heads turned. A nearby intern spilled a tray of juice cups. Two nurses froze mid-step. The woman flinched, clutching the baby tighter, her pace quickening. Lena stepped in front of her, hand up, voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, excuse me. You can't. I have permission," the woman said quickly. Her tone clipped. "Private room. Just heading out to the garden. He's mine." Her voice wavered. At that moment, a third figure approached from behind the first time he had ever encountered Sonny on duty. Dr. Jason Tran, a first-year resident, 28 years old, lean and bookish with close-cropped black hair and wire-frame glasses perched over sharp, observant eyes. His white coat was slightly too big for him, sleeves half-rolled, badge crooked on the lapel. Born and raised in California by immigrant parents from Jianeng, Jason carried a quiet curiosity with him, rarely speaking unless necessary, but always watching. He had been reviewing charts when he heard the bark and came to investigate. Now, standing beside Lena, he noted the woman's posture tense. The baby didn't move. Jason stepped forward. "Excuse me, miss, can I see your patient band, please?" "I already showed it to the nurse on shift," the woman said, clutching the infant closer. "If you'll let me through." Sonny didn't move. He stood planted between her and the hallway exit, teeth bared just slightly, not out of aggression, but warning. Jason met Lena's eyes. Something was wrong. Lena spoke into her hospital radio calmly. "Security to the neonatal wing, please. Code yellow." The woman hesitated, and in that pause everything seemed to tilt. Her hands shook. The baby whimpered barely a sound. Sonny let out another bark, sharper this time. When two security officers arrived moments later, they gently asked the woman to step aside. She resisted at first, but seeing the eyes now on her from every direction, she relented. The baby was taken carefully and returned to the ward, while the woman, who eventually identified herself as Rochelle Adams, was escorted to a private office. The baby, as it turned out, was not hers. As the hallway slowly returned to its normal hum, Jason knelt down beside Sonny, studying him for the first time up close. "You knew," he murmured. Then he glanced at Lena. "Has he ever done anything like that before?" "Never," she said. "Not once." Jason looked back down the hallway, then at the closed door where Rochelle had gone. Something stirred in him, not just suspicion, but memory. And with that, he excused himself to begin checking medical logs. The quiet after the storm at St. Clair Hospital was uneasy. The soft hum of machinery returned. Nurses exchanged hurried whispers, and patients peered out from their rooms, curious but unsettled. Lena Morris stood just outside the staff lounge, one hand steady on Sonny's harness, the other wrapped around a paper cup of untouched coffee. Her hazel eyes tracked the security monitor, replaying the moment Rochelle Adams stepped out of the neonatal ward with the baby in her arms. Sonny sat beside her, still alert, head slightly tilted, as if he too was watching. Security footage had confirmed what they feared. Rochelle had bypassed the infant check system using a staff badge that wasn't hers. Her name didn't appear on any approved visitor list. Worse, the child she carried recorded as Baby Noah K. in the official registry was registered under a different last name than the one she had given. Discrepancies like that didn't just happen. They were made. God, Lena muttered, her voice barely audible. This could have ended differently. Just then, Jason Tran entered the room, his white coat slightly wrinkled from having skipped lunch. He carried a thin file in his hand, his eyes tired but focused. "Her records are paper thin," he said. "Emergency contact blank. No birth history tied to this hospital, yet she's been seen on these premises multiple times over the last 4 months." Lena looked at him. Was she posing as a patient? Jason shook his head. Not officially. But I think someone let her in. He placed the file on the table. "I need to speak with someone who might remember her." That's when he thought of Maria. Maria Lopez had worked night shifts at St. Clair for over 6 years. A petite woman in her late 40s, she wore her thick black hair in a single long braid, her dark eyes framed by tired lines from years of sleepless duty. Known for her gentle manner and a sharp memory, Maria was one of the few staff who didn't rely on digital logs. She remembered faces. And she remembered Rochelle. Jason found Maria in the staff break room just as her shift was ending. She sat alone with her thermos, scrolling through photos of her twin grandsons on her phone. Her scrubs were a faded teal, and her white sneakers had clearly walked more miles than most. She looked up as Jason approached her, expression guarded, wary of another last-minute request. "Sorry to bother you, Maria," he said, soft-voiced. "I'm following up on a patient issue. Do you have a moment?" Maria nodded, slow and deliberate. "You're the new intern," she said with a faint smile. "Jason, right?" He nodded, grateful. "Do you remember a woman, medium height, dark coat? Narrow face, goes by the name Rochelle Adams. I think she might have been around at night." "Maybe the maternity floor." Maria's brow furrowed. She set down her thermos. "See, I remember her. She was here maybe 2 or 3 months ago. Said she was visiting her sister in recovery, but I couldn't find a matching name in the log." She sat alone in the waiting room. Quiet. Something in her eyes. It stayed with me. Jason leaned in. Was she pregnant? Maria hesitated, then nodded. She was, about 6 months along. I remember she rubbed her belly while watching the nursery through the glass. I thought she looked sad. Not excited, not like the others. Then one night she disappeared. I didn't see her again. Jason's voice dropped. "Did she lose the baby?" Maria crossed herself instinctively. "I heard she miscarried, emergency visit, but she wasn't admitted under Rochelle. There was another name, C. Ryder or something. I didn't ask questions." Jason's mind raced. He thanked Maria and slipped away, already replaying the pattern in his head. Rochelle, or whatever her real name was, had been grieving. And not just observing. She had come back to the place where she lost a child, but this time she intended to leave with one. Back in her office, Lena sat reviewing the updated internal report. She was interrupted by the arrival of Security Officer Dennis Malloy, a former cop mid-50s with a stocky build and a face like carved granite, softened only by the kindness in his tone. He handed Lena the final verification. No wristband scan, no exit code logged. If your dog hadn't barked, she'd have vanished. Lena glanced at Sonny, who lay by her desk, eyes half closed, but ears still turning at every footfall. "He's more than a therapy dog," she said almost to herself. Dennis smiled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Whatever he is, we need more like him." That afternoon, Jason sent a formal inquiry to hospital administration to check for badge use inconsistencies. but unofficially he was already chasing a different trail. The badge Rochelle had used belonged to a nurse who'd reported it missing last month, another small detail that had gotten buried in bureaucratic shuffle. Jason pieced it together like a ghost map. Rochelle had lost something in this place, and then she returned to take back what wasn't hers. Outside, clouds rolled in, slowly casting long shadows across Maple Glen. The town seemed quiet as ever, but within the glass walls of St. Clair the sense of disquiet lingered. Lena moved through the corridors like a conductor trying to steady the rhythm again, pausing to check on mothers, adjusting schedules, keeping smiles painted on. Sonny, however, stayed close to the neonatal wing. He positioned himself just near the glass as if watching, waiting. A soft whimper escaped his throat every time someone passed with a child in their arms. Lena finally sat beside him on the cold bench, sighing. "You saw something. None of us did," she murmured. "You knew." Sonny placed his head on her knee and let out a soft huff. Some things didn't need words. The next morning at St. Clair was washed in the cold hush of overcast skies. Rain hadn't fallen, but it hung in the air restless, waiting like a breath never fully exhaled. The fluorescent lights inside hummed quietly against the tiled walls, casting long reflections along the freshly mopped corridor. Lena walked with a coffee cup in hand, her steps slower than usual. Her eyes drifted from nameplates on doors to the golden blur that padded silently ahead of her Sonny. The golden retriever moved with an odd urgency. Not quite frantic, but with a certainty that tugged at her instincts. Sonny's thick, honey-colored coat brushed the wall occasionally as he passed each turn, nose close to the floor, tail stiff. Lena had seen this behavior before, during panic attacks or high emotional trauma, but never quite like this. Not directed at a place. They rounded the corner near the laundry bay. A seldom-used hallway stretched before them, lit only at intervals. Metal carts, stacked with soiled linens, stood haphazardly along the walls, the scent of detergent mixed with something older moustier. Lena hesitated, then called out, "Sonny, what are you looking for?" He didn't stop. His pace quickened head low until he came to an old gray laundry chute door set beside a battered janitor's sink. There he whined. Not a bark, not a growl, just a quiet, urgent cry. Then he looked back at Lena, his amber eyes flicking up with such human intensity it made her breath catch. Lena knelt beside him. She ran her hand along the chute's lower hinge and flinched. Blood, not fresh but unmistakable, had dried in a thin, rust-colored smear. Just beneath the chute's edge, half tucked into a linen bag, was a pastel baby cap printed with faded lambs, and a hospital tag marked Noah K. Another item spilled from the bag, tiny pants with a darker dried stain across the leg. She didn't move. Her breath lodged in her chest. Then, as if summoned by shared instinct, Jason arrived. Jason Tran had stayed at the hospital, late reviewing entry logs and cross-referencing badge records in the nurse's lounge. He was pale from lack of sleep, a fine shadow of stubble across his jaw. His dark hair was unkempt, and his light blue scrubs hung slightly looser than usual, a testament to skipped meals. He approached, eyes locking on Sonny, then on the blood-stained cloth in Lena's hand. "What is that?" he asked, though he already knew. "Clothing," Lena whispered. "Babies. And blood." Jason crouched beside her. He didn't speak for a moment. Then his voice barely audible. This was staged. It wasn't spontaneous. She turned to him. "You're sure?" He nodded. "I've seen it before." Lena's brow furrowed. "Where?" Jason didn't answer right away. He stood his back to her, looking down the narrow hallway that felt more like a tunnel now. Then, finally, he said, "When I was 9, my sister was taken. Right from our front yard in San Jose." The cops thought it was a random snatch, but later we found out it was someone who had been watching us for weeks. Left her shoe behind a trash can, like a breadcrumb. I thought it was a mistake at first, but sometimes people want to be found or to send a message. Lena stepped closer. "You never mentioned her?" "I never talk about it," he replied. "They never found her." There was a long pause. Sonny sat between them, tail wrapped around his legs, ears half raised, still watching the laundry chute. Lena reached gently and touched Jason's arm. "Do you think Rochelle's trying to say something?" Jason's eyes were distant. "I think Rochelle lost something, and now she's trying to rewrite the ending." Within an hour, the police were called in. Officer Daniel Greer, a well-built man in his early 40s with a buzz cut, and the stern manner of someone who'd seen too much and never slept well, arrived to document the scene. Greer was fair, but skeptical by nature. He wore a tan sheriff's jacket over a dark vest, a notepad tucked in one hand, and a flashlight in the other. Blood's dried. "Won't be easy to match unless it's a registered profile," he muttered, kneeling by the chute. Jason handed him the baby cap. It belonged to the infant Rochelle was carrying. Greer raised an eyebrow. "How'd you find it?" Lena hesitated. The dog did. That earned her a look. Right, of course he did. But then Sonny barked once short and sharp as if daring the officer to doubt him again. Greer sighed. "Okay, all right, therapy dog's smarter than half my precinct." Despite the discovery, they couldn't charge Rochelle. Not yet. The items were circumstantial, the blood not yet confirmed to belong to the child. And without proof of intent, all they had was a frightened woman with a history of miscarriage and grief. That night, Lena returned to her office late, the corridors hushed, lit only by emergency strips that painted the hospital in cool blue hues. Jason was already there, seated at her desk, flipping through old visitation logs he'd managed to access. "I think I've found something," he said. She wasn't using her real name. "But Rochelle, she came in for grief counseling 2 years ago. The file's been marked inactive, but her therapist's notes mentioned delusional attachments to other patients' children." "Why wasn't this flagged?" Lena asked, her voice tight. "Because Jason said bitterly her therapist died last year. Heart attack. And the file was left buried in archived records." Lena sat across from him, exhausted. "Do you think there's still a chance we can help her?" Jason didn't answer right away. Then softly, "I'm not sure if she wants help, but I know we can't stop." Sonny lay curled beneath the desk, eyes closed now, but his tail thumped softly as if in agreement. The skies over Maple Glen had darkened by mid-afternoon, heavy with the promise of a spring storm. The town seemed to shrink beneath the looming clouds, and the red brick silhouette of St. Clair Hospital looked older, somehow like it had weathered too many secrets already. Inside, the fluorescent light in Lena Morris's office flickered faintly above her head. She sat at her desk, eyes fixed on the hospital's digital patient registry, scrolling back and forth with increasing frustration. Every birth record that matched the infant Rochelle had taken had a timestamp, but one of them didn't feel right. The birth date had changed. She'd seen the chart 2 days ago. Baby Noah K. had been born March 4th at 2:19 a.m., but now it read March 5th, 3:27 a.m. A minor discrepancy, maybe, but to Lena it screamed intentional tampering. Birth times weren't like typos. They were sacred stamps in the medical world. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime. An internal message had appeared on her hospital account, but the sender field was blank. It contained no greeting, no signature, just a single line of text center screen. Someone used elevated admin credentials to alter the record. Check access logs. Be quick. Lena stiffened. She knew enough about digital security to realize what this implied. Administrative privileges weren't handed out lightly. Only senior IT staff and a handful of department heads could make changes at that level. She stood up and reached for her phone. Within 30 minutes, she met Jason Tran in the diagnostics break room, one of the few places without wall-mounted cameras. Jason was still in his scrubs, hunched over a tablet. His hair was damp from a rushed shower, and he looked even more pale than usual, but his eyes were sharp. "I checked the server logs," he said quietly. "Whoever accessed the system used an override account tagged St. Clair admin root. That account was locked 3 years ago after a ransomware scare. It shouldn't even exist." Lena leaned against the counter, her arms folded. "Then who brought it back?" Jason shook his head. Could have been a ghosted login, someone from inside with enough clearance to hide their trail. They both knew what that meant. Whoever had changed the baby's birth record wasn't just trying to cover a mistake. They were rewriting history. Meanwhile, in the nurse's lounge, unease was spreading like spilled bleach. Maria Lopez stood by the sink wringing her hands. She had just been informed of her temporary suspension pending internal review. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and her composure cracked as she tried to reassure 2 junior nurses that everything would clear up. The hallway felt colder than usual, not because of the temperature but the air of suspicion that now lingered around her. Maria wore her usual teal scrubs, her hair still in that single braid, but her posture had changed. Shoulders, slumped eyes darting. People she had mentored now avoided meeting her gaze. Nurse Cynthia Rourke, a woman in her early 30s with dyed blonde hair tied in a messy bun and a tattoo of a swallow just visible under her collar, had once trained under Maria. But now she whispered to another nurse behind her coffee mug. She was the night shift when that woman came through. Maybe she really did help her. Maria overheard but said nothing. When Lena found her later that day, Maria was alone folding towels at the end of the hallway. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said before Lena could speak. Her voice cracked. "I swear on my grandsons' lives." Lena nodded gently. "I know. But this goes deeper than just a mistake on a night shift. Someone's hiding something, Maria. We just don't know who yet." That same afternoon, a second anonymous message appeared this time, routed through an internal printer on the floor below Lena's office. It contained only a fragment of code, user ID, Yalexnane27, access, time, 03:41 a.m., terminal 2B. Jason and Lena traced it to a disused kiosk near the linen supply room. No camera coverage, no badge scan required. Oh, whoever had accessed the record had done so while most of the hospital was asleep. Jason stared at the screen, then looked at Lena. "Someone's playing chess, and we're still trying to figure out the board." Meanwhile, Sonny had not moved from his post near the nursery. For nearly a day and a half, the golden furred retriever had stayed either beside the viewing window or lying across the threshold, tail motionless, eyes focused. Nurses had tried to coax him away with treats or water, but he refused to budge unless Lena herself called him off. An old janitor named Saul Jenkins, a wiry man in his late 60s with sun-damaged skin, and faded denim overalls paused while sweeping the corridor and gave Sonny a look of reverent amusement. "Ain't never seen a dog guard a hallway like that," he muttered, his voice carrying the dusty accent of deep Kentucky. Like he knows something ain't right. He wasn't wrong. Later that evening, Lena sat down beside Sonny on the hallway bench. The nursery glowed softly behind the glass. Tiny bodies, swaddled in pale green, rested in bassinets, unaware of the storm quietly brewing around them. She placed her hand on Sonny's neck. "You're not leaving, are you?" she whispered. He didn't move, but the steady rise and fall of his chest was answer enough. As rain began to patter softly on the hospital windows, a quiet resolve settled over Lena. Someone had tampered with truth, thinking no one would notice. But they didn't account for a dog's nose or the memories buried in broken hearts. It was nearly dawn when the cry came. Not loud, not panicked, but thin and wavering like a breeze through cracked wood. It slipped through the back wing of St. Clair, barely audible beneath the hum of aging ventilation. Sonny was the only one who heard it. He lifted his head from where he'd been lying outside the neonatal ward, ears swiveling toward the distant sound. His body tensed. Without waiting for command or hesitation, he stood and trotted down the corridor, tail stiff and nose twitching. Outside, fog curled low across the hospital's rear courtyard, where old maintenance sheds and equipment storage units stood in quiet neglect. The early morning light had not yet pierced the mist, and the air was thick with dew and ghostly chill. Few staff ventured back here anymore. The area had long been deemed unnecessary, the storage space forgotten in favor of modern upgrades. But Sonny remembered the scent. He followed it past the dumpsters, through an open gate left ajar, and to a structure of peeling green siding and warped wooden doors barely held shut by rusted chains. The old supply shed. He barked once, sharp and quick. Then again, louder, more urgent. Inside the main building, Lena, who had been in the break room reviewing Maria's reinstatement request, heard him. "Sonny," she whispered, heart leaping. Jason, seated across from her with a cup of bitter black coffee, looked up at once. "He's outside." They both moved fast, their steps echoing down the hall past the nurse's station and out into the heavy air. Lena called to him again, but Sonny didn't come. His barking turned into a low whine, now desperate and rhythmic. They followed the sound to the far end of the auxiliary courtyard. Lena reached the shed door first. The chain had been slid off but left hanging. Jason gripped the handle and pulled. Inside was darkness and dust. The smell of mildew and disuse hung thick, but beneath it something else. The unmistakable scent of formula baby wipes and faint copper blood, or something close to it. The flashlight from Jason's phone cut across the shadows and landed on a shape curled in the corner, swaddled in mismatched hospital blankets. The baby. Noah. He was pale lips, dry but breathing. His tiny hands twitched feebly and his mouth formed silent sobs. Lena rushed forward, checking his vitals, voice trembling. Dehydrated. Cold, but no injuries, I can see. Sonny didn't move from the door. He stood guard his frame, taut, watching the room as if expecting danger to emerge from the gloom. Jason turned, scanning the shelves along the wall. Old mop heads, cracked cleaning containers, a single pair of unused rubber boots. Then, on a shelf above eye level, something small and plastic caught his attention. A bracelet. He reached up and retrieved it. It was a child's hospital wristband, discolored from dust, but still legible. One side read Ella in faded blue letters. His breath hitched. His sister's name. Jason stared at it as if it might vanish if he blinked. Slowly, he turned it over. No hospital ID, no date, just a name. "This doesn't belong to Noah," he said quietly. "This was planted." Lena looked up, her eyes wide. "You think Rochelle left it for you?" Jason didn't answer. The memory of his sister's disappearance flooded his mind again. The long car ride searching for signs, the flyers stapled to trees, the police saying it was likely a stranger. But what if it wasn't? What if Rochelle wasn't trying to escape, but to connect? They got Noah to the ER within minutes. Fluids were administered and his vitals stabilized quickly. Nurses clustered around the infant, voices, hushed hands efficient. Lena watched through the glass, her arms crossed tightly, trying to suppress the shaking in her fingers. Rochelle was nowhere to be found. Security footage pulled from the rear stairwell showed her slipping through the fire exit an hour earlier. She wore a different coat, now borrowed or stolen, and a scarf wrapped tightly around her face. No one had stopped her. No one had known to. Officer Greer arrived again, jaw tight with irritation. "We had patrols outside," he said, thumbing through a printout of still images. But she knew how to move. She planned this. She didn't take the baby with her, Lena pointed out. "No," Jason added softly. "She left him behind. But she left something else, too." He held up the bracelet in a small evidence bag. Greer squinted. "What's that A name?" Jason said. "My sister's name?" Greer frowned, unsure whether to be dismissive or curious. "You think this is personal? I think Jason said this is deeper than we thought." Sonny lay curled beside the ER doors, his nose pressed to the floor, eyes half closed, but far from resting. Lena reached down and stroked his back. "You found him," she whispered. "You brought him home." Jason stood quietly nearby, his thoughts tangled in questions too old to answer. Rochelle had vanished again, but the name she left behind echoed louder than her absence. The rain had finally come. It pelted the streets of Maple Glen in a constant rhythm, turning sidewalks into streams and softening the edges of the world. In the gray wash of early evening, the sirens were almost swallowed by the storm, but their meaning was clear. Lena stood by the glass window of her office in St. Clair, watching the red and blue lights blur across the parking lot. Sonny lay at her feet, head resting on his paws, ears tilted in faint tension. The call had come through only 30 minutes earlier. Rochelle Adams had been found. She had been spotted wandering the outskirts of town near the abandoned mills past Old Timber Road, drenched and barefoot, clutching a large canvas tote bag. A convenience store clerk named Ethan Price, a lanky man in his late 20s with a sparse beard, dark hoodie, and a nervous twitch in his left eye, had called it in when she stumbled in for bottled water, leaving the bills soaked and trembling in her hands. She looked scared, he told the deputy, but not like she was hiding. More like she didn't know where she was. Now, in a secured room, 2 floors below the neonatal unit, Rochelle sat shivering beneath a fleece hospital blanket, her clothes damp and muddy, her eyes bloodshot and ringed with exhaustion. She was thin, too thin, with sharp cheekbones and hollowed temples. Her dark hair was plastered to her scalp, her hands clasped so tightly around the canvas tote that her knuckles had turned white. Jason Tran stood outside the observation room, arms crossed. He wore his lab coat again, but his expression was different now, no longer skeptical or guarded, but wounded, uncertain. Lena approached a file in her hand, her voice low. They found IDs under 3 names in her bag, along with prescriptions for antidepressants and sedatives from 3 different states. But there's something else. Jason didn't respond. He looked through the glass where Rochelle sat, her lips moving soundlessly. She had photographs, Lena continued. Old ones. Pre-digital. Most of them faded. But one caught my eye. She handed Jason a photo inside a clear sleeve. A child, maybe 5 years old, grinned in front of a green and gold tricycle. His hair was thick and dark. A woman knelt beside him, Rochelle, unmistakably younger, with a hand resting protectively on his back. Jason stared. That's me. Are you sure? He nodded slowly. I remember that trike. It didn't make sense at first. Jason had grown up in San Jose, raised by his father after a bitter custody battle. His mother had disappeared from his life after the divorce. There was no mention of a sister. No photos, no stories. But now, everything began to crack. Lena organized a trauma-informed session, unofficial, off-record. A private consultation room was cleared with no observation mirror, no recording. Just neutral walls, soft chairs, dim lights, and tissues. Jason sat on one side of the room, legs bouncing slightly, his hands clenched into fists on his lap. Rochelle sat across from him, still wrapped in the blanket, her fingers twisting a corner of it nervously. Lena sat between them, not as a doctor now, but as a guide, someone who could walk both of them through the fog without pushing them off the edge. Rochelle spoke in fragments. She used to lock me in the bathroom when I cried, said it was my fault he left. Jason didn't move. After the court hearing, she whispered they told me you were going with Dad, that I'd never see you again. Then, she got worse. Jason finally looked up. His eyes shimmered with disbelief, pain, and something older recognition. I kept the bracelet. Rochelle continued, your old toy badge. I named all my dolls Jason. I knew you were real. I knew. Jason's voice cracked. They told me I was an only child. Rochelle let out a sound, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. She erased me, said I was too broken to keep, sent me to an aunt who didn't want me either. Then I ran, again and again. Lena listened silently, her eyes burning. She had heard thousands of grief stories. But this wasn't just grief. It was obliteration, an identity scrubbed away, rewritten like the hospital records. Jason leaned forward. Why come here? Because I remembered, Rochelle said, clutching the blanket tighter. The name Jason Tran on the hospital directory. I didn't know if it was you, but when I saw the baby, I thought, maybe I could protect someone this time. Tears slid down her cheek. I wasn't trying to steal him, I didn't want him to cry alone. Like I did. Outside, the storm continued, distant thunder rolling like the voice of something ancient and watching. Inside that small room, 2 lives once ripped apart hesitantly began to reconnect. Not in forgiveness, not yet, but in truth. The hospital's administration ruled Rochelle unfit for jail, instead transferring her to the psychiatric unit under supervised care. She would not be charged with kidnapping, but instead evaluated under trauma and dissociative identity considerations. It was not freedom, but it was no longer a cell. Lena watched as the orderlies led Rochelle gently down the hallway. Jason stood silently still, holding the photograph of himself as a child. Sonny, who had watched everything with his usual quiet intensity, padded over and rested his head on Jason's knee. He didn't bark, he didn't move, just stayed. Because sometimes the soul knows when something long lost has been returned, not perfectly, not without damage but returned nonetheless. Morning returned to Maple Glen with a golden hush the storm clouds finally spent, leaving behind a world rinsed clean. Dew clung to the petals of white magnolias blooming in front of St. Clair Hospital, and sunlight filtered through the windows of the neonatal wing, like a quiet benediction. Inside the halls still whispered with what had passed, but there was something softer now. Something that resembled hope. Jason Tran stood beside the hospital bassinet, eyes resting on the sleeping infant inside. Noah lay swaddled in fresh linen, a faint coo escaping from his parted lips as one hand flinched in a dreaming gesture. Jason's dark eyes softened, and a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, a look rarely seen on his face in recent years. The paperwork had come through that morning. He was now the emergency foster guardian of Noah K., with full temporary custodianship pending evaluation. Jason, still in his pale blue scrubs, hadn't slept much the night before. His lean frame looked almost too tall for the corner of the nursery, where he stood, his shoulders broad, beneath a borrowed cardigan he'd forgotten to return to the nurse's lounge. He carried a weariness that came not from hours, but from years. Yet this morning it was touched by something else. Resolve. Lena Morris entered quietly behind him. She wore a warm-toned sweater over gray slacks, her chestnut hair tucked into a relaxed braid. Her expression, so often composed today, showed the barest tremble of emotion beneath it. She held a small clipboard with a ribbon tucked into the corner, Noah's handprint painted in blue. "He looks peaceful," she said gently. Jason nodded, like he doesn't know any of it happened. "That's the gift of being this small," she replied. "The past hasn't had time to grow claws." He looked at her. "I want to do right by him. You already are." The door creaked open as Dr. Evelyn Markham stepped in, clipboard in hand. Evelyn was the attending pediatric physician, mid-50s, silver-gray curls, pinned up beneath a pink-patterned surgical cap, her round glasses perched on the tip of her nose. She had the warm but brisk energy of someone who'd raised 4 kids and now had no time for nonsense, though her voice was always kind. "Vitals look good," she said, flipping through Noah's chart. "Hydration stabilized. You've done well keeping him regulated, Jason." Jason offered a quiet thanks. Evelyn peered over her glasses. "This won't be easy," she added more gently now. "But he needs someone who's already shown they can listen. Not just to cries, but to silences." Jason looked at Noah again and nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." Later that day, in a small courtyard near the staff entrance, a short ceremony took place. A representative from the State Department of Health arrived, a tall woman named Clarice Bolton, dressed in a crisp charcoal suit and practical flats. Clarice was in her early 60s with salt and pepper curls and sharp green eyes that missed nothing. She had a voice like polished wood, steady, warm, and dignified. Most therapy animals are trained to calm, Clarice said to the gathered nurses and staff, her voice carrying over the courtyard lawn. But this one alerted, guarded, led. Sonny didn't just provide comfort, he initiated rescue. For that, the state is proud to present the Service Valor Medallion to Sonny of St. Clair Hospital. Applause rose soft but heartfelt. Sonny sat proudly beside Lena. His navy blue vest freshly brushed his golden fur, catching the sun like it had been woven from light itself. He didn't understand medals, but he understood the quiet reverence around him. When Clarice bent down and clipped the medal to his collar, Sonny gave one soft bark, just one, and wagged his tail once. It was enough. In the days that followed, life at St. Clair began to find a rhythm again. Rochelle had been transferred under supervision to Havenfield Psychiatric Center just outside town, where she would undergo long-term trauma therapy. Jason hadn't decided whether he would visit, but he kept a photo of him on the tricycle in his locker. As for Lena and Jason, something delicate had begun to form. Not romantic, not yet, but a bond carved not from spark, but from shared burden. They began having coffee together between rounds. He brought her leftover pho from the only decent Vietnamese takeout in town. She left handwritten notes on his charts, small things, jokes only he would catch. There was one evening, a week after the ceremony, where they sat together on the back steps of the hospital, watching the last light fade. Lena cradled a mug of herbal tea, Jason a lukewarm energy drink. Sonny lay between them, chin resting on Lena's foot. "He still watches the hallway sometimes," Jason said. "He's waiting," Lena replied, "not for danger. Just watching the ones who made it." Jason glanced at her. "Like you." Lena smiled faintly. "No, like you." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It held the shape of everything that had broken and everything that had begun to heal. Spring had fully arrived in Maple Glen. The courtyard lawn behind St. Clair Hospital shimmered in afternoon sun, framed by dogwood trees in bloom, and the distant chatter of birds reclaiming their sky. Nurses brought out folding chairs and picnic blankets, while colorful streamers danced gently in the breeze, tied to the low-hanging branches of an old apple tree, whose blossoms were just beginning to open. The tree had been there for decades, some said since the hospital's founding, and under its shade something quietly beautiful had been planned. The celebration was small, just as Lena had intended. A thank-you gathering for Sonny, whose presence had become more than therapeutic, more than heroic, something sacred. Word had traveled beyond the hospital walls. Local reporters had called. A retired K-9 handler had sent a gift basket. But today wasn't about publicity, it was about gratitude. Sonny lay in the center of a circle formed by those who had come to know him not as a dog, but as a constant, steady unknowing. His golden coat glistened in the soft light, his muzzle resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded in the warmth. A blue satin ribbon bearing the words "Heart of St. Clair" was tied gently around his collar beneath the gleaming medallion he'd been awarded. Children from the pediatric wing, now recovering and allowed supervised fresh air, took turns petting his back or laying next to him, their laughter light and untethered. Among them, a young girl named Maggie, 6, pale from weeks of chemotherapy but fierce in spirit, rested her head against his side. "He's better than medicine," she declared matter-of-factly to Nurse Cynthia Rourke, who chuckled and wiped her eyes. Jason sat nearby, Noah in his lap. The baby was 7 months old now, and beginning to show signs of mobility. His legs wobbled with tentative strength, and his hands patted the blanket as if testing the idea of crawling. His round, hazel eyes, so like Jason's, were fixed on Sonny. "He's trying," Jason whispered with a soft laugh. "He wants to chase the dog." Lena was standing beside him, her cardigan sleeve pushed up, holding a slice of fruit tart she'd barely touched. She glanced down at the boy, then over at Jason. "Maybe someday they'll run together. Maybe sooner than we think," Jason replied. Amid the gathering, a new face moved gracefully through the crowd. Sarah Bennett, St. Clair's newly hired pediatric art therapist, had joined the team just a week earlier. She was in her early 40s, tall and willowy, with shoulder-length silver blonde hair and a quiet and pathetic demeanor that seemed to soften every space she entered. Her soft denim dress and linen apron had faint watercolor stains, and she carried a flat cardboard folder tucked beneath one arm. Trauma, she once confided to Lena, was something she'd lived through, not studied. Her teenage son had survived a near drowning 3 years ago, leaving her with a permanent resolve to bring healing where she could. "Jason," she said gently, offering the folder. He took it curious, then opened it. Inside was a crayon drawing on stiff paper, childlike but detailed. Under the apple tree, 4 figures stood: a tall man in a white coat, a woman in blue with a braid, a baby crawling toward a dog with a golden coat. The sun beamed down from the top corner. At the bottom, in block letters, read the words, "My happy people." Maggie Jason blinked. Then, without a word, handed it to Lena. She stared at the picture, her fingers trembling slightly. Something caught in her throat. She tried to smile, but it wobbled. And then, without warning, the tears came. She hadn't cried, not like this, since the day her husband passed 3 years ago. Not through her daughter's final breath. Not through sleepless nights beside patients who wouldn't recover. But now, under the apple tree, with laughter and sunlight, and the deep, watchful stillness of a dog who had seen it all, she wept. Jason didn't speak. He simply sat with Noah cradled in one arm and placed his other hand gently over hers. Sonny lifted his head, eyes settling on them for a long, quiet moment. His tail thumped once, not to ask for anything, just to say, "I see you." By the end of the afternoon, as guests trickled back into the building, Lena remained outside a little longer, sitting on the grass beneath the blooming tree. Maggie had fallen asleep beside Sonny, her bald head resting on his warm flank. Noah was now dozing in Jason's arms, his small chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. And in that moment it no longer mattered how things had begun with theft, trauma, and lost names, because somehow here in this patch of sun beneath white petals and patient hearts, everything had returned to where it needed to be. Not perfectly, but wholly, and with love. In the quietest moments of life, we often find the most profound miracles, like the soft glow of morning light breaking through the storm, or a dog's loyal eyes watching over those who cannot see the way. The story of Sonny, Jason, Lena, and little Noah reminds us that even in the darkest hours, there is always a light, whether it comes from unexpected places or from within ourselves. Sometimes the miracles aren't grand gestures. They don't come in bursts of fire or loud proclamations. They come quietly, like a whisper in the wind or a hand held when we're lost. The true miracle is the ability to heal, to rebuild what was broken, and to find our way back home no matter how lost we've felt. So let this story be a reminder that God's grace works in ways we can't always understand, but in ways that we are called to believe in. Healing is possible, love is endless, and the light will always find its way through. If you believe in the power of miracles, the importance of kindness, and the strength of hope, leave an amen in the comments below. Share this story with those who may need it most. And remember, every small act of love can spark a change. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories of hope, faith, and the kind of love that can heal us all. May God bless each one of you and guide you on your journey. Amen.